Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust you had a great weekend. I certainly did, and I took a photograph of the sunset yesterday just outside my house, which is near Windsor in Nairobi, and it was a lovely evening. I'd like to thank Bonnie Tunya for having me on his CNBC Africa show. Thank you, Bonnie. My home thoughts, interestingly enough, ended up with William S. Burroughs, who's famously said, "Paranoia is just having the right information." And then I like this quote, "Desperation is the raw material of drastic change. Only those who can leave behind everything they have ever believed in can hope to escape." I like this tweet from Banksy, "The world before social media." Just have a look at that. It's pretty good, I think. And also this photograph, Water World. It's of a swimming pool. I placed it perpendicular to the ocean and the wall to act as a connection piece which leads you to one or the other, says Ando of Kasawabi's pool. Political reflections, I should start with this photograph that was tweeted by Mashable of a pastor in Liberia crying on the church floor after losing much of his congregation to Ebola. And then post a photograph of the nuclear facility at Natanz, which has been the source of Iranian defiance and Western fears. We're still waiting to see how that pans out. Obviously, the oil price move is putting tremendous pressure on Iran right now as well. Putin made some very interesting comments. They are throwing their might to remove the risks they have created themselves, and they are paying an increasing price. I think that the policies of the ruling elite are erroneous. I am convinced that they go against our interests, undermine trust in the United States, he said, without offering specific examples. The probabilities of a series of acute conflicts with indirect and even direct involvement of major powers has sharply increased, he said. Ukraine is an example of such conflicts that influence a global balance of forces, and I think not the last one. I will say it openly, he said about Yanukovych. He asked to be driven away to Russia, which we did. In response to Russia's annexation of Crimea in March and its support for pro-Russian insurgents fighting government troops in eastern Ukraine, US and EU have imposed several rounds of crippling sanctions against Moscow. But Putin claimed that Moscow would not beg in response to the sanctions imposed on it. Also argue that the interests of Russia and other nations need to be taken into account to stabilize the global situation. Russia is not demanding some special, exclusive place in the world. While respecting interests of others, we simply want our interests to be taken into account too, and our position to be respected, he said. And I think, frankly, he has a point, and that this two-pivot business to Asia and to Russia is an unnecessary geopolitical carry or lift. We've got to watch those developments closely, and we live in a much more fluid world, as I wrote previously. Mr. Nyusi, a former defense minister, garnered 57% of the vote according to provisional results from Mozambique. But this is a sharp fall from 75% won by his predecessor, Armando Guebuza, 5 years ago. But this is sufficient to avoid a second runoff. Initial results of October 15 will need to be ratified by the Constitutional Court before becoming official and final. The tally from the National Elections Commission gave Nyusi 57% of the votes. Afonso Dhlakama had just over 36%, and Davi Simanga of the Mozambique Democratic Movement obtained nearly 7%. Frelimo has ruled Mozambique since its independence in 1975, maintained its majority in the 250-seat parliament, but was expected to end up with some 50 seats fewer than it won in 2009 elections. Renamo, which was the main opposition party, and considered Tlakama was in the bush until about 4 weeks ago. They've said that it was widespread fraud and irregularities, but has previously said that there's going to be no return to war and it's ruled out violence. On Thursday, of course, just a week after the elections, Mozambique opened up 15 new offshore and onshore areas for gas and oil exploration and production in its north, centre and south. Of course, there have been enormous gas finds in Mozambique in the Rovuma Basin. I'll put up a photograph of Maputo taken from the sea. I'll put up a link to that piece I wrote in June, how Mozambique could be the next Qatar, and I think this election has outperformed expectations. And then I'll put up an image of the poster. I was in Maputo earlier this year for an Africa Rising conference, and the poster is in Portuguese and in English, and I took a photo of it. Returning to a very interesting piece in the New York Review of Books, and I'm just going to quote one sentence, but it's well worth reading. It's written by Charles Glass. It's about Syria. And he says it's like the lion Tamer. He feeds and trains the lion, but the lion might kill him at the right moment. And that made me remember Siegfried and Roy, who had tigers. We were in Las Vegas many years ago and went to see a show, and subsequently one of them was eaten by one of their tigers. Sir Malcolm Rifkin, talking about the Emir of Qatar's visit to London, said the meeting was a perfect opportunity to tell the Qataris they could no longer run with the hare and hunt with the hounds. And then I'll put up a photograph of Kilich, where Islamic State militants stand before the explosion of an airstrike on Tilsahir Hill near the border. Coming to international markets, the euro was just above 127 early in the morning, has slipped marginally below it. Dollar index 85.52, Japanese yen 107.98, Swissy 0.9499, Pound 161.02, Aussie 0.8813, India rupee 61.19, South Korean won 10.52.33, Real 247.35. Remember, it touched 250. South African rand is still below 11 at 10.94.44. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. I remain bullish, but the dollar is a little bit softer. Essentially, futures traders have paired bets for an early Fed rate rise strike. The odds of the benchmark increasing from a range of 0 to 0.25% by October 2015 were at 50%, down from 85% at the end of last month. I think the Fed will announce the end of its QE strategy of bond buying at its meeting on October 28 and October 29. And I'll put up a 3-month chart of the euro dollar. I still think we're headed lower, but obviously there was a short covering rally after the release of the stress tests. Going back to the commodity markets, I wrote that piece about oil, and I'll just read a little bit of it. The US administration has turned price slasher. Like in Alfred Hitchcock's totemic movie Psycho, oil has been sliced up real good. The US has flooded the oil market, and the commodity is now a geopolitical spear. It is the US that is the new price setter for the oil markets, and this is a deep and important geopolitical development. New price levels will have immediate and enormous geopolitical and financial knock-on effects. It will place intolerable pressure on oil producers, and particularly those operating from a higher base price. It's not too difficult to calculate who are the biggest losers in this new price normal. Vladimir Putin's Russia springs to mind first. As I've previously mentioned, the pivot to Asia is, in my view, a naval blockade strategy aimed at cutting off China from its imports of crude oil. Between now and 2040, the EIA predicts US oil imports will fall from 9.5 million barrels per day to 6.9 million, while China's will rise from 5 million to 14.2 million. And I said My point is that Obama has taken control of the crude oil cockpit. He is in charge of the aeroplane. He has control of all the instruments. It's been a wild ride for a few weeks. This was written on October 13, but it could get a whole lot wilder, I said. Global research had picked up on the secret Saudi-US deal on Syria and oil. What has happened is that the longtime US ally inside OPEC, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, has been flooding the market with deep discounted oil, triggering a price war within OPEC, with Iran following suit and panic selling short in oil futures markets. The Saudis are targeting sales to Asia for the discounts, and in particular its major Asian customer China, where it is reportedly offering its crude for a mere $50 to $60 a barrel rather than the earlier price of around $100. That Saudi financial discounting operation in turn is by all appearance being coordinated with the US Treasury Financial Warfare Operation via its Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, in cooperation with a handful of inside players on Wall Street who control oil derivatives trading. The result is a market panic that is gaining momentum daily. China is quite happy to buy the cheap oil, but her close allies, Russia and Iran, are being hit severely. According to Rashid Abamni, president of the Riyadh-based Saudi Arabia Oil Policies and Strategic Expectations Center, the dramatic price collapse is being deliberately caused by the Saudis, OPEC's largest producer. The public reason claimed is to gain new markets in a global market of weakening oil demand. The real reason, according to Abamni, is to put pressure on Iran on her nuclear program and on Russia to end her support for Bashar al-Assad. Goldman said, "We believe that OPEC will no longer act as the first mover swing producer and that US shale oil output will be called to fill this role." Goldman said that's the point I was making about Barack Obama being in the cockpit. Our forecast also reflects the realization of a loss of pricing power by core OPEC. I'll put up a 3-month chart of crude oil. I think it's going a lot lower still. Brent crude fell from $115.71 a barrel on June 19th to $82.60 a barrel on October 16th, which was the lowest price in almost 4 years. Every 10% drop in oil prices spurs 0.15% more consumption in the global economy. That consumption sets up additional demand of almost 500,000 barrels of oil a day, Goldman estimates. Oil that's 20% cheaper than the average price of the past 3 years amounts to a $1.1 trillion annual stimulus to the world economy. That was Citigroup. I'll also put up a 6-month chart of crude oil. I think we're going to test a lot lower. Gold is at 1230.71. I'll put up a 6-month chart. I think that's headed lower too. Coffee futures retreated 9.1% last week, which is the most since May. That was on better rains in Brazil. Ms. Rousseff was declared the winner after receiving 51.5% of the vote compared to Mr. Neves' 48.5%. The real improved. We'll see it trade once Latin America opens. Gained 1.1%, biggest rally on Friday amongst all its 31 major counterparts, but it lost 1.6% last week. Touched 250, which was the lowest level since December 2008. I'll put up a link for the Brazilian Bovespa. And then I'll put up an image of the entrance hall of the Palacio de Alvorada in Brasilia, which was designed by Oscar Niemeyer. And I often, every year, drive down to Mombasa for a few days by the beach. And on the 7th of January 2013, I wrote this piece. My Christmas holiday ritual is to jump into a car and take the family down to the coast. The Nairobi-Mombasa road arrows into immensities and is impossible to believe. It retains a near mystical hold on my imagination and connects me to my childhood and beyond. Dad used to once own an Alfa Romeo, there were then only 3 in the country. and my pilgrimage along the road started then when we used to come from Mombasa. Now, of course, we set off from Nairobi. But the road still has its hold. The landmarks still reach out to me. This time we were swarmed by doves near Imali, which was breathtaking. And there is still an eerie and deserted, very Oscar Niemeyer building, which might have been a petrol station with a restaurant, but is now deserted, and you just see it on the road. I'll put up an image of it, taken 663 days ago. Coming to Africa, I wrote a piece, African Economies Reacting Differently to Shocks. There's been plenty of action in Africa and its markets of late. The collapse in oil prices, Brent crude fell from $115.71 a barrel on June 19 to $82.60 on October 16th, the lowest price in almost 4 years, is weighing big time on African oil producers such as Nigeria, where the Naira has been wobbling, and Angola, and South Sudan. Last week we learned that Trinidad and Tobago is substituting crude oil from Gabon with Colombian and Russian shipments amid protests by refinery workers alarmed by the outbreak of Ebola in other African countries. This was not something I had factored in. If African oil economies, already pounded by lower oil prices, cannot sell with their crude oil barrels in a timely manner, or even at all, the consequential knock-on effects will be dramatic. Let's stay with the commodity market for a moment and note that Ebola has Côte d'Ivoire surrounded on all sides, and cocoa prices, Ivory Coast the top producer, whilst 15% up year to date, could seriously spike off the charts if the country suffers a serious Ebola infection. Paul Bulcker, the CEO of Nestle, saw fit to mention the situation twice last week. Nestle, he said, is on high alert because the company has operations in Africa, including Ivory Coast, Ghana, Guinea, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Senegal. On October 16, Bulcker said Nestle's cocoa supply comes out of that region. African currency markets have seen a great deal of action. The Ghanaian cedi has been a big outlier to the downside against the dollar. The cedi has fallen 35.32% this year, hitting a low of 3.89 to the dollar on August the 28th, and last time it was trading 3.18, 3.28, so a meaningful bounce. The rand, of course, has been soft and is always at the bleeding edge when markets are roiled. It's a Pavlovian reaction the world over. The world looks uncertain, sell the rand. What is interesting is the performance of the Egyptian pound. It's rock steady, and our very own Teflon shilling, which has retreated about 4% year to date. I do not have to tell you how currency performance can juice or shred returns. The Dar es Salaam All-Share Index is up 43% since the start of the year as the standout African equity index in 2014. It is worth mentioning that there is a trend change in matters Tanzanian capital markets, and investors would do well to pay attention. Egypt is in second place, has returned 29.7% year to date, but the EGX 30 has retreated 1,014 points since September 30. Nairobi sits third, the all shares up 17.7% and just 2.8% below a record high reached on September the 23rd. South Africa, while still positive 3.5% year to date, has corrected 4,363 points since July 29 when it closed at a record. Nigeria has been struggling as investors consider next year's election and oil prices. African equities have struggled in October. Last week but one, the African Eurobond complex took a big buffeting, with prices seeing the most dramatic fall in a single session for a number of years. Prices have recovered since then. Our 5-year Eurobond trades at just over 5% and our 10-year just over 6%. The sharp fall in prices will see super petrol prices below 100 per litre before year end. This will prove a powerful catalyst for improved consumer sentiment and improved spending. The resilience of the shilling and the Nairobi Securities Exchange All-Share Index is informed by that view. Interesting piece in Deal Book in the New York Times, investors eager for African sovereign debt despite plenty of risks. And then a very good piece in Al Jazeera America, search for the next Ebola in the Congo Basin. Kisangani, DRC Congo, at a crowded stall hidden deep in the city's central market. A group of women hover over charred pieces of meat. They call out to the passing shoppers $4 for an antelope, $6 for the thigh of a bush pig. For $10 you can purchase an entire monkey. Officially, the sale of bushmeat is illegal, and when the market chief walks by, the women quickly shove their wares into tattered plastic bags, hidden behind the concrete slab tables. I sell everything, says Mutumbe Marie Biako, who has been a vendor at this particular stall for the last 10 years. Usually I have monkey, wild pig, antelope, python, even bat, but I'm not selling bat today. The sale of bushmeat, she laments, is slowed, not because it's illegal to purchase, but because a constant stream of programming on the local radio station has convinced Biako's customers that they are better off eating more typical dinner fare like chicken or beef. Very interesting piece saying the Congo Basin is the world's second largest tropical rainforest after the Amazon. The forest is also home to more than 270 species of mammals, including endangered gorillas and the elusive forest giraffe, the okapi. It's a mecca for biodiversity, a giant lung for the earth, and an important resource for the 40 million people who live along its borders. But the Congo Basin is also home to millions of viruses, many of which have yet to be identified. And the deeper that people encroach into the forest, the greater the likelihood that those viruses will make the jump to humans from other animals. In the last 5 years, we have detected over 800 viruses globally. 540 of these have been viruses which have been never seen before. Most of the global epidemics the world has faced in the past few decades have originated in forest ecosystems. The Congo Basin alone has been responsible as the source of a remarkable number of pandemic threats. AIDS is believed to have crossed from chimpanzees to humans sometime in the late 1920s in what is also known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. The first cases of Ebola, believed to have originated from fruit bats, were also recorded in the DRC in '76. Scientists estimate that 60% of emerging infectious diseases come from animals, and the vast majority of those are from wildlife. All viruses are dangerous. Of the viruses we know, Ebola is the most dangerous. It's a level 4 virus, but we don't know what else is out there. In the past 5 years, we've detected over 800 viruses globally. 440 of these viruses have never been seen before. We don't know if they are all pathogens, but some of them certainly are. A pathogen is any infectious agent that can produce illness in its host. It's often a virus, but it can also be bacteria, fungus, or other microorganisms. Viruses can be particularly problematic pathogens because they're able to mutate quickly and are not easily treated. Today, scientists exploring the world's virus hotspots, including the Amazon Basin, Congo Basin, Southeast Asia. We're interested in surveillance of viruses that are most likely to be transmitted. And then talking about the transmission from animals to humans, Dr. Eddie Kambale doesn't break a sweat as he crests the last hill in a 3-hour hike through Virunga National Park. Kambale is the head veterinarian in the Congo for gorilla doctors. Today he's checking up on an injured silverback, the head of the Munyanga family. You can see as a skin flap hanging low from above his eye. We only intervene when absolutely necessary. In this case, we're able to administer antibiotics and painkillers without approaching the animal. Sometimes Kambale and his team have to take a more direct role when treating the apes, and it's during these interventions that samples are collected for virus testing. Gorillas share 95% of their genetic code with humans, making it particularly easy for viruses to jump between the two. We have the gorillas and we have our gorilla trackers. The trackers, they go to see the gorillas, they come home, they have goats, chickens, and other animals at their homes that they interact with. The DRC has seen 7 Ebola outbreaks in the last 38 years. Very interesting piece, well worth reading. I'll put up an image of a monkey being sold for about $10 in Kisangani. I already wrote that piece in October when I said the severity of Ebola lies in the speed and the escape velocity of infections. I'll put up an image I found from InfoWars of Ebola. Colleagues say the US doctor with Ebola was very careful. We are demoralized and saddened by what's happened to Craig, said the social worker. He did excellent work. I'm asking myself how he got the virus because he was a rigorous man, added the hygienist whose job is to clean patients who often have severe diarrhea and are vomiting and bleeding profusely. Since we learned that he was infected, we've had low morale, and we understand that we are all at risk despite the measures. And then I found the original report about the Zaire Ebola virus disease in Guinea. In March 2014, the World Health Organization was notified of an outbreak of a communicable disease characterized by fever, severe diarrhea, vomiting, and a high fatality rate in Guinea. Virologic investigation identified Zaire Ebola virus as the causative agent. Full-length genome sequencing and phylogenetic analysis showed that EBOV from Guinea forms a separate clade in relation to the known EBOV strains from the DRC and Gabon. And then essentially they've identified it started with this very young girl. South African all-share up 3.508% year to date, but down 4,363 points since the 29th of July. Dollar Rand was still below 1094.86, but I think we'll blow through that at some point and blow through 11 and go back towards 12. Egyptian pound, as I've said, very, very steady. Egyptian stock market up 29.71% in 2014, but down 1,014 points since the 30th of September. The Egyptian leaders saying foreign hands were behind the Sinai attack, which killed 31 troops. He's characterized it as a foreign-funded operation and vowed to take drastic action. There is a big conspiracy against us, he said. Obviously a very, very big attack. I think he's pointing the finger, no doubt, at Qatar. But things are getting quite, the intensity levels have gone up dramatically. The Nigerian all-share is at 5.5-month lows, minus 5.715% year to date, has fallen just over 4,000 points since July 4th. Ghana was downgraded a notch by S&P. That stock exchange composite index is plus 3.776% year to date. Tanzania, of course, is the best performing equity index in Africa. It's up 42.97% year to date. I like this photograph, a small dock at the Garba landing on Lake Victoria. Won second prize in the creative category, Uganda Press. Interesting article I picked up on Bloomberg. Projections indicate that if the momentum on reducing interest rates is maintained, mortgage rates may drop below 10% by the end of the year. This is Habil Alaka, the Kenya Bankers Association CEO, on October 22nd. Kenya government negotiating with local banks to reduce interest lenders charge on mortgages to single digits. Total housing shortage in Kenya is estimated at 150,000 to 200,000 homes in urban areas and more than 300,000 in rural areas. Affordable home ownership is still a pipe dream for most Kenyans. The high land prices and high cost of infrastructure keep most homes out of reach for most Kenyans. KCB is seeking to increase loans. Joshua saying that 30,000 mortgage lending accounts for about 6% of bank loans compared with about 25% in South Africa. It's basically a big move to get this interest rate down. KCB is offering some 0% mortgages as well. And as I said previously and earlier this year, 10% mortgage rates are a magic tipping point and will prove the catalyst for the next leg higher in a decade-long property market rally, which has seen prices rise more than 3.26 times over that 10-year period. East African Portland Cement reported a full-year loss after tax, big turnaround from the Full year profit after tax minus 386.631 million versus a profit of 1.77 billion last time around. Talking about difficult trading environment, a weak shilling, high costs, increased price competition, poor results. The shilling is at 89.30. The Nairobi All Share is up 17.687%, 2.79% below record high set on the 23rd of September. If you need to check any listed share, just scroll down on rich wrap-ups. And then I like this photograph of an orphaned baby elephant basking in a mud puddle at the David Sheldrick Elephant Orphanage, which we visited and I told you about not too long ago. And it's a lovely photograph and on Dave's suite. Once again, thank you for stopping by.